Thanks for joining us today on this edition of Business Daily. I'm Ji-yoon in Seoul. We have a lot of stories lined up for you today, so let's get started with a look at the day's highlights. Korea's jobless rate dropped slightly in June from the previous month, but the youth unemployment rate continues to remain high amid sluggish economic growth. The Bank of Korea is headed for another rate decision tomorrow as the country continues to deal with economic uncertainties stemming from Brexit and the government's corporate restructuring drive. These stories and more coming right up. Korea's job market showed a slight improvement in June, but the youth unemployment rate remains stubbornly high. Prospects aren't so rosy in the months to come either, especially with Korea's corporate restructuring drive likely to cast a dark cloud over the job market. All right, Kim Min-ji starts us off.
Korea's job market saw a slight lift in June. Statistics Korea says the country added more than 350,000 jobs last month from a year ago, bringing the total number of employed to around 26.6 million. Job growth had been slow for the previous 2 months, with the number of new jobs added sitting in the 200,000 range.
The pickup comes on the back of a base effect thanks to increased employment in the restaurant and accommodation sectors, which were hit hard by the MERS outbreak in June last year.
But breaking it down by age group and sector, the situation seems quite dire. Korea's youth jobless rate for the month of June hit its highest point in 17 years. While the employment rate for young people aged 15 to 29 edged up slightly to over 43%, the jobless rate for that group stood at over 10% last month, inching up from 9.7% in May. On top of that, the government's ongoing corporate restructuring drive is expected to take a toll on the relevant industries down the line. The manufacturing industry, for one, added 15,000 workers in June from a year ago, in stark contrast to the 50,000 added in May. Regions where the country's shipbuilding industries are concentrated saw their jobless rates go up last month.
While corporate restructuring is underway, large-scale layoffs have yet to take place in the manufacturing and shipbuilding sectors. The negative impact of the restructuring drive on the job market will show up more dominantly in the latter half of the year and perhaps carry over into the first half of next year.
While the government has vowed to focus on job creation and cope with downside risks by unleashing a supplementary budget of over $8 billion, experts say the positive effects may not be as significant, considering there was also a stimulus package during the same period last year, following the MERS outbreak. Kim Min-ji, Business Daily.
And we'll see a lot coming out of the Bank of Korea tomorrow as it sets the key interest rate for this month in its Monetary Policy Board meeting, while also releasing its new growth outlook for the Korean economy. And to tell us more about what we can expect from all this, our Hwang Ji-hye joins us in the studio today. Hello, Ji-hye.
Hi, Ji.
All right, so let's start with the benchmark interest rate. Are they going to cut it or keep it steady?
Well, because the Bank of Korea has never lowered the key interest rate for 2 straight months, the market consensus for July is that the central bank will hold steady with the current 1.25% rate and gauge the impact of the previous rate cut in June. You'll remember the BOK slashed the benchmark rate by 0.25 percentage point just last month, ending almost a year of holding rates. It was a surprise decision that not many had expected. Analysts say the central bank will also want to take some time, given that the government announced a stimulus package late last month that includes an extra budget worth around $8.5 billion. They say the BOK is likely to wait and see whether these measures will help lift the economy.
So the rate hold projection, that's for this month, but what about the remainder of this year?
Right, so actually changes are expected down the line. A majority of experts say that another rate cut by 25 basis points is widely expected towards the end of the year, and that, of course, to boost the economy that's still suffering from sluggish demand at home and abroad. External conditions that could further threaten the country's growth have recently increased in the face of Britain's decision to divorce the EU and the latest agreement between Korea and the U.S. to deploy an advanced missile defense system on Korean soil. Both issues are considered to be a threat to Korea's main growth engine exports, especially with the latter THAAD issue possibly having a negative impact on trade with the country's biggest trading partner, of course, China, which has expressly voiced its opposition to the deployment.
And also uncertainties in the global economy, especially after the rising geopolitical tension after the THAAD deployment decision with the U.S. and the South Korea, exports to China and the negative sentiment among the Northeast Asian countries might negatively affect Korea trade.
So expectations show that Korea is likely to join the global move toward, more easing prompted by Brexit.
Exactly, Jiun. This week, Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe actually ordered a fresh round of stimulus after an election win over the weekend. A rate meeting is set for late July in Japan, and Brexit has fueled expectations for a rate cut there as the referendum outcome in the UK has caused nervous global investors to flock to safe assets, strengthening the Japanese yen. A rate cut is also expected from the Bank of England, which is, of course, set to hold its policy meeting tomorrow.
After the Brexit, countries worldwide are heading to implement monetary easing policies like quantitative easing and lowering key rates. And that means the BOK has room to also jump into that race.
So facing all these uncertainties, I wouldn't be surprised if the Bank of Korea revised down the country's growth outlook. So what are we expecting on that front?
Well, you're right. The BOK's current outlook, growth outlook for this year stands at 2.8%. And as you said, many project the central bank to revise down its growth outlook to 2.6%. On top of the uncertainties stemming from abroad, analysts point to the government's recent corporate restructuring drive that may further contribute to the downgrade. Massive layoffs that will put a dent in domestic consumption are expected to take place with the overhaul in some of the country's major industries like shipbuilding and shipping. Korea Offshore and Shipbuilding Association expects up to 63,000 workers in the industry to lose their jobs by the end of next year. If the BOK actually trims its latest growth projection, it will fall in line with other local financial institutions, as you can see in that graph, that expect Korea to grow in the mid 2% range.
All right, so before we let you go, tell us more about that separate inflation press conference that's also expected to take place tomorrow. What's all that about?
Sure thing. The Bank of Korea has set a 3-year inflation target of 2%, and that is starting this year. And while setting this new target, the central bank pledged to provide additional explanations if inflation fails to meet its target for 6 straight months by at least 0.5 percentage point. Consumer price growth has been running in the 0% range for 3 out of the past 6 months. Price growth for the months that did slightly better still hovered in the 1% range.
So we'll definitely look forward to all of that tomorrow. Thank you so much for coming in today, Geunhye.
You're welcome.
President Park Geun-hye heads to Mongolia on Thursday for a 5-day visit. Her jam-packed schedule begins with the ASEM Summit, short for Asia-Europe meeting, during which she is expected to call for more cross-continental cooperation to denuclearize North Korea. Following the 2-day gathering, President Park will remain in the capital of Ulaanbaatar to have a bilateral summit talks with her Mongolian counterpart. The presidential office of Geunhye has said that Seoul is eyeing infrastructure projects in the Central Asian nation, as well as on working together on projects related to renewable energy and resources. President Park Geun-hye will take part in a business forum and meet with Korean business persons in Mongolia before returning home on Monday. Foreign direct investment between Korea and China has soared since a free trade agreement between the two countries went into effect in December. According to Korea International Trade Association on Wednesday, Korea's FDI in China was at $2.2 billion from the start of the year to end May, a 12% increase on year. The figure had been on a downward trend after peaking at $6 billion in 2004, but started climbing again in 2012. China's FDI in Korea also increased sharply to $700 million in the first half of the year, recording an 80% jump from the same period last year, according to Korea Trade Investment Promotion Agency. The agency says the increased investment is the result of more Korean firms expanding into China and more diversified Chinese interests in the Korean market, ranging from real estate to cultural content and food. Service companies of Korea's top 30 business groups are said to have underperformed over the past 5 years, falling short of expectations. Corporate Tracker CEO Score said 720 business units, or 66% of the total, are engaged in the service industry, employing about 43% of all workers within the groups. But sales only made up about 34% of the group's total, while operating profit accounted for even less at 30%. In fact, the sales ratio grew by less than 1 percentage point from 2010 to 2015. Now, despite this lackluster performance, groups like Lotte, Hanwha, and CJ, which saw more than half of their sales come from the service sector, fared much better in terms of the rate of improvement compared to manufacturing-dependent companies. In its drive to get a handle on fine dust emissions, the Korean government has pledged to phase out coal-fired power plants over time and replace their capacity with natural gas instead. But as these plants are more expensive to operate, there are concerns that this could lead to higher electricity bills. Our Eunice Kim has more.
The message was clear. The government will tackle air pollution and fine dust in particular head-on by placing a bullseye on the country's fuming coal-burning plants.
We'll commit 10 trillion won through 2030 to deal with coal plants. The goal is to cut fine dust levels by 24%, sulfur oxides by 16%, and nitrogen oxides by 57% from levels recorded in 2015 by 2030.
The plan calls for shutting down 10 aged coal power generators in operation for more than 30 years by 2025 and replacing them with cleaner sources such as LNG or liquefied natural gas. But the problem is LNG plants are costlier to run, 3 times as much as our coal-burning counterparts, which is why the country has relied more heavily on the cheaper option. While the utilization rate of LNG plants dropped to 40% last year, coal was closer to full capacity at 90%.
If we rely less on coal and push for natural gas or renewables, that will raise the base price, which could inevitably raise the cost of electricity.
Korea's 53 coal-powered units currently supply 40% of the country's power needs, followed by nuclear at around 30% and LNG at 25%. Renewable energy, like solar and wind power, make up a paltry 2%. As the government has expressed its commitment to retrofitting the country's reliance on cheap but dirty fuel, there are calls for a contingency plan on electricity bills that are poised to rise, further hitting the pocketbooks of Korean households. Eunice Kim, Business Daily.
3D printing still feels like something out of reach, even when the printers are getting more compact and affordable, considering the lowest end model will still break the bank. But our Kim Hae-sang tells us that things are changing, with the technology becoming more accessible on various platforms.
3D printing has been a buzzword for quite some time, but the technology hasn't been readily available for many people as of recent, mainly due to its high costs. But it seems like that is about to change by merging the technology with the concept of sharing economy. This 3D printing platform links designers to local 3D printer owners. Users who need a 3D printed object can simply choose a device, upload a design, choose the material type, size, and color, then type in a delivery address and click the Submit button. Within 2 days, a one-of-a-kind prototype is delivered to the user's front door.
Shared economy is everywhere. You can share your cars, you can share your houses, and now you can share your 3D printer. So our service connect 3D printer owners and to the potential users like designers who don't understand anything about technology, but they can make an order and have their object printed out.
The service is convenient and fast and is expected to create a new market supply and demand, boosting growth in the 3D printing industry. But to use such service or take advantage of 3D technology, creativity and know-how come first above all else. That's why this workshop in downtown Seoul, one of 200 similar establishments in Korea, offers 3D printing education programs. These middle school students follow instructions on how to use the 3D interface, then come up with their own 3D designs.
I love watching robot movies, and an android was the first thing that came to mind. I can't wait to see my 3D printed android design.
Participants also learn about the whole 3D printing process from conceptualization to materialization. 3D printing is already widely used in the aerospace, medical, and auto industries. With various platforms and education programs that help us get familiar with 3D printers, it looks like we'll be seeing more of them in our everyday lives. Kim Hae-sung, Business Daily.
And that wraps it up for today, but we'll be back tomorrow with more business news that matters to you. So don't forget to tune in then. Thanks for watching and goodbye.